Okay, so it's day 6 of the A to Z of Python, and that brings us to the letter F. Now, if I think of an F word that I use all the time when I'm programming Python, it can really only be one thing, and that is, of course, FTP. That's everyone's favorite protocol, right? And so we're going to talk about it. Well, what does FTP have to do with you? Well, it depends. If you're writing a script or program that maybe runs overnight and it needs to connect to an FTP to download a large data set, it might be nice to be able to build that functionality into your program. If you don't do that, but you want to see how this works, stick along anyway. I mean, it's just another way to show the power and flexibility of Python, because it has so many great built-in libraries that can do all kinds of advanced things. And so this will do a great demonstration of just what's possible with very little code. So to get started, let's import the FTP library, and it's ftp lib, and that's going to contain everything that we need to connect, change directories, download files, all that good stuff. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to just go through not really a user-driven application, more of like just a script that we can kind of program to do a couple of things. And then I'll go over the main features of FTP utilization in Python, and then after that I'll flesh out like a pretty robust FTP client that you could write and utilize yourself if you wanted to, or take it and make it your own. So stick in there. If you are a beginner, this will be great. If you're a little bit more advanced, you might want to bump ahead and see how the whole thing comes together. So the way this works is we want to first start by getting the FTP address. So let's just create a variable called site address, and we'll just ask the user through an input here, please enter FTP address. Okay, so once we have the address, we have to do something with it, and the way that I like to do it is use a with statement. And with the with statement, we can create an FTP object that we can do all kinds of stuff to. So that looks like this: with ftp lib.ftp, and this part of this accepts all kinds of parameters. You see the host, username, password, so you can pass all these variables along to it. Now we're going to use an anonymous FTP, so we're just going to pass along the host name, but if you had a username and password, you could enter that here and that would help you out. So let's just stick for now with a basic site address, and it's going to be as FTP. Alright, so we have the FTP object. We can start doing stuff. The first thing, of course, is to log in. So that will establish, or attempt to establish, an FTP connection with whatever site the user's inputted in the site address field. Now, when you log into an FTP site, usually at the top there's some sort of little welcome message, kind of says, hey, you know, you've connected, and you know, go ahead and look around. So let's print that out. That would be kind of cool. So print ftp dot, and I see here all the, and well, there's get welcome right at the top, but there's all kinds of things you can do, all kinds of functions you can call here to, you know, change directories, list a directory, delete something. Everything is pretty much self-explanatory here, and that's part of what makes this so easy. There's going to be ftp.getWelcome, and that'll print out the welcome message for us. And then what do you do next? Well, I think we should show the user the current directory that they're in, which in the beginning will just be, you know, the front slash, like the home directory. And then we'll print the directory contents, and then maybe change the directory, show what directory we're in again, and list the contents again, and then download a file, and then exit the FTP. So let's do that. It should only take maybe 10 lines of code. So the first thing they want to do is print some sort of statement here. So like current directory, and we'll use the command ftp.pwd. pwd is just the current directory. Okay, so that just returns the current directory. So this is going to print out current directory, and it'll be, you know, slash whatever it is, and that's great. So we'll do that, and then we'll say let's print the contents of that directory. So we'll do ftp.dir. Now, the ftp.pwd, that does return the current directory, but it does not print automatically to the screen. So this needs to be encapsulated in a print function. The ftp.dir, that actually prints like automatically for you. So you don't need to encapsulate this in a print statement. It's not necessary. So those are two differences. If you're using this on its own and you don't see any output, well, that's what's going on. All right, so let's ask the user where they want to go next. So we'll create a variable called next directory, and we'll ask the user, where do you want to go next? And then we'll do something with that. So then, of course, the change directory command is cwd. All right, now if that's not self-explanatory, you're not familiar with FTPs or using Linux or whatever, and these commands seem a little abstract to you, just Google FTP lib Python 3.5 documentation, and each of the available options is described in detail. So it's pretty easy to figure out what they do if you just read the docs. I mean, the more you program Python, the more you can understand the documentation, and like the easier it is to find answers just by going there. And the way you do this is you will actually put the directory name. It's the only argument that it takes. So we're going to put the next directory variable in there, and we will, let's see, after that, let's print again. Let's just copy this code here. So let's run this and see what happens. All right, it's asking us, we're going to do ftp.debian.org. That's a Linux distribution, and it's an open anonymous FTP that we can utilize. And okay, perfect. So we've got the welcome message, okay, which is here. We've got the current directory listing, which is here, and then we've got the contents of the directory here, which is, it's just one folder. That's all that's there. So where do you want to go next? Let's go into the Debian folder. And there you go. So it was able to change the directory and let us know. And I probably want to print the contents of that. So we'll just copy that and paste it down there. Let's run this again. Okay, logged in. Let's go to the Debian directory, and boom, there you go. So we're in, we're navigating. That's great. So we see a list of files here and directories, and so these are the directories. These are files. These are actually file permissions, and it lets you know like what you can and can't do. These are like also the numerical representation of that, and these are actually the file names. So let's say we want to download like the readme.html file. Okay, so let's do that, or whatever file the person wants to do. Let's do it that way. So we're going to do download equals input. What file would you like to download? And so the user will input a name of any of these files. And it's important to note that we're going to be entering files that are valid. If we put in like a directory or have a typo in there, this thing is going to blow up. So we're not handling any errors right now. We'll go into that at the latter half of this video. We'll build out something that can handle exceptions. Okay, so like invalid file, or if it's rejected, or you don't have access, whatever it may be. So what do we do? Okay, so we've got the download variable set, and we're going to use something called retrieve binary, and this tells the FTP library to connect and retrieve a file, and it also tells it where to save it locally. So there's like quite a few things that you have to type in here. So the first thing, as you see here, is the command, and that's going to be a string. It's going to be retrieve space and then the file name. So in this case, we're going to use download because this will be the file name that the user inputs. So what will happen is this will be sort of concatenated as one string, and it'll be retrieve and then whatever file name they type in, and that will tell the system to go out and fetch that particular document from the FTP. Now, we also need to tell Python where to store that file locally, and we're going to do that with the command open file name, which will be download. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling Python whatever file they say they want to download, we'll fetch that and then store it locally as the same file name. So this readme.html will be actually saved as readme.html on my computer. You may or may not want to do it that way. You can specify a different local file name. That's up to you. And then we have to put in the mode, which is going to be WB. Okay, if you're not familiar with this, you can look at like CSV, the video that I did talks about modes for writing data, and that will help clarify some of this. And then .write. So that's it. So this is probably the most complicated command that you'll do in this video series here. So what's happening again? We're telling it to retrieve the file as binary. This is the command and the file name combined. And this here is telling it to write the binary to the computer locally as whatever file name we've told it. So get this file, save it here as this name. That's it. And then we might want to get some kind of like confirmation. So this is again where error handling is great, because our exception handling, because if it fails to download, you don't want to just say great, it got it. You want to say whoops, it didn't get it. But we're going to assume that it's going to work. So I'm going to put print file download successful, just so the user kind of knows. You don't want it to just silently download and not tell them anything. And then the last but not least, ftp.quit. And then let's print your typical goodbye. Okay, so that's a lot of code, but that should do it. So let's give it a shot. Let's run this. And ftp.debian.org. Where do you want to go? Let's go into the Debian folder. Here's all the files. Okay, let's download readme.html. This is case sensitive, so make sure you type it in correctly. All right. It says file download successful, goodbye. So let's see if that actually worked. Let's exit presentation mode. And yep, there it is. So that's the HTML file, the README file. So it did work. So at this point, you've got enough information to get started. You're able to build your own little FTP interface, and this may be sufficient, especially if the site is always the same and you're downloading the same file name over and over again, like an updated data file. You may be able to just kind of copy and paste these out and add FTP functionality to your application. But what if you want to build a full-fledged FTP program? Well, if that's what you're interested in, let's do that. Everybody else, if you don't care, you can leave now. But if you want to see it, let's get started. So I'm just going to move this down a little bit. And I'm going to create two functions. We're going to do the Ftp Connect. And I'm going to do Ftp Command. And that's going to take the Ftp object. So we're going to have two functions, one that attempts to connect to the FTP and one that handles commands from the user, like change directory, list directory contents, download a file, whatever it is that you want to do, exit, whatever it is. And so we're going to work on this one first, the Ftp Connect. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this site address variable and we're going to move it up here. So the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to ask the user for the input, which is the same behavior as here. And then we're going to build in some error handling. If you haven't had a chance to familiarize yourself with that, yesterday's video was on error handling, so go back and watch that and then come back. It'll make more sense. So we're going to try, and then we're going to do with, and actually we can probably just steal this here. Maybe down to, let's steal this. All right, so we've logged in, got the welcome message. We've got the current directory listed. That's good. And what else do we want to do? Maybe we want to print out a list of commands. Okay, so this is different. So we need to tell the user what they can do. So let's print out some options. So we'll say valid commands are, and let's do change directory, get file, let's do ls for list contents, and exit. Let's try that. And then maybe put an example. So like example get readme dot text. So this is just kind of giving some context to the user. Like, these are things that you can do if you want to. Otherwise, they have no idea what they can and can't do, and they'll just be typing in random stuff. So I would recommend that if this is going to be something that's kind of going to be used by other people, maybe research what the typical FTP commands are and try to match those and reduce the amount of incorrect inputs that people try to do. Okay, so at this point, we've logged in, we've asked the user what they want to do. It's time to call the FTP command. So let's do that now. And we'll pass the FTP object here. Okay, we'll pass it along, and that'll essentially take our established FTP connection and pass it over to command so we can continue to do different functions. Now, this, you will see this at the end after you've built everything out, but what ends up happening is that after this is going to loop. We're going to build this to loop over and over and over and over and over again. And once they say exit as their command, it's going to break out of this loop, and then the code will continue. So at the end, when they type in exit, we actually want to just break out of the application altogether. So that'll be like once FTP command exits, end this function, exit program. And then we're going to need a except. So the only exception that you'll get when you're trying to connect to the FTP is basically like that it can't connect. Okay, we don't care why. Like, did you type it in wrong? Is whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm just gonna do like a very broad exception clause here. And one thing that's neat is the FTP library has this thing called ftp lib dot all errors. You can do as error, you know. So this will handle all FTP errors, and what you'll see later is that we can catch the exceptions for different types of errors. So we can have like persistent errors, like a 550, like say if someone tries to change to a directory that doesn't exist, like they have a typo and that's never going to change because that directory doesn't exist. That would be like a 550 error, or like a temporary error, like a 400 or 404 or something like that. If there's just some kind of temporary problem, you can route those differently. But we're going to route all errors to this exception, and we're just going to print failed to connect, check your address and credentials. And then we'll print E at the end, so that will give them the full-fledged error message in case that gives them any kind of context as to what exactly went wrong. So the problem with this, as it stands right now, is that if the connection works, like it successfully connects, it'll skip over to the FTP command. But if it fails, it just quits, right? It prints this out and it quits. But we would like, if it fails, to just ask them to try again. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go and type in while true and indent all this over. And, well, let's try it again. Okay, so on this, all this has to go over to 1. It's the beauty of having the IDE is that it underlines things when they're not done correctly. So this is looking pretty good. So this will be our connection function, and the while true means it'll continue to run this like indefinitely until you break out of it. So if we try to log in but it fails and there's an exception, it's going to print the exception message and say, you know, check your address. And then because it's in a like an infinite loop here, it's going to jump back to the top and it's going to ask the user to input the address again. So this is like adding a little bit of resilience to our application. If it fails to connect, it'll just ask them to try again. We don't want it to just drop out. Okay, so this looks good. Now we have to kind of get into the nitty-gritty. So let's do a while true here as well. And why would we do that? Well, usually when you log into an FTP site, you're going to initiate like a bunch of commands, like changing directories, looking at the directory contents, maybe downloading a file, maybe going back up a directory and downloading another file, deleting a file. But you're going to almost always type in more than one command. So what we want to do is have this function loop over and over and over again until we receive the exit command. So the while true will keep this thing stuck in a loop, and it'll just keep asking the user, what's the next thing you want to do? What's the next thing you want to do? So, and we can add like a note here. Run until exit command is received from user. So we know that we're going to build some kind of break in the exit command. Okay, so let's take the command and ask the user what they want to do. So input, enter a command. So this command will be like say cd debian or get readme.html. So the command will take the form of like that or get readme.html. It's 2 words, okay? It's the command and then what the actual target is. So like in this case, change to this folder or get this file. So it's 2 parts, so we have to handle that. So how can we do that? Well, let's create another variable called commands and break that into 2 pieces. We'll do command dot split, and what's this going to do? It's going to split the command and the file directory into a list. So commands will hold, it'll be a list, index 1, index 0 of both the command and the target. Okay, so that'll be like command 0 would be like cd, and then commands 1 would be like Debian if you're going to do cd Debian. So you'll see how that works here in a second. So now we can create our logic here. So we're going to do if commands 0, okay, and again that'll be the actual command itself. If that equals, let's do cd first, and this will be for change directory. We would like to do ftp.cwd, and we'll do commands 1. Okay, so this is the command, and this is the destination of the target. So we're going to change directory to the directory name. That's how that's going to work. And then we'll use kind of similar logic as above to print some context here. So we'll do the same thing, print directory of ftp.pwd. So kind of say, oh, let's just do current, we'll do current directory. So it's consistent. And we'll do ftp.dir to list the contents. So this is looking familiar. All right, it's just providing a visual to the user. And let's print at the bottom, we'll print it again. So it's going to be a long printout. So you can build this any way that you want, but we'll do, actually, you know what? Let's just do it like this. Let's do directory of, and so it'll say directory of, and it'll say directory of whatever the directory is, print the contents out, and then we'll say current directory. All right, and do it again. So you can decide how you want to build this out. All of this is just to create the visual for the user. Okay, you can literally make this say whatever you want. You don't have to have them all in there, but I'm just showing you how it works. Okay, so that looks good. And you know what? Let's handle an error. Let's put a try in here. And let's handle the exception. Except this time, let's do ftp lib.error perm as E. And the goal here is to handle 550 errors. And that's what's known as a not found no permission error. And that's the one that you're going to get if you get them, if you get any at all. And the reason you'll get that is if they don't capitalize README and they try to download a file or something, that's going to shoot back a 550 that the file is not found. Okay, if they try to, in this case, change to a directory but they misspell Debian or something like that, or they try to change to a directory that's actually a file or whatever it is, it's going to spit back a 550. We want to handle that. So let's do error code. We're going to take this E, which is the error code, and we're going to figure out what error code it was explicitly. So it's going to be, let's do something like error code STRE dot split, and we'll do none 1. Okay, so that's going to split the string up. So the error string is kind of long, but it always starts with the numerical code. So it'll say 550 file not found or no permission, something like that. So we'll handle that. So we'll say if error code 0, okay, and the first index for this list is always going to be the numerical error. So if you see an FTP error, just like the welcome message, you see here it's 220, which is the code. Okay, so that's a success code. And then it gives the actual welcome message. Well, here it's going to spit back, in most cases, 550 file or directory not found, something like that. So we want to take the code here, the error code itself, and if that equals, and that is going to be a string, so don't try and use it, write that as an integer, or it's going to blow up. Okay, so if it's 550, print error code 1, which is the remainder of the error code. And we'll do something that gives some context, like directory may not exist, or you may not have permission to view it. So what will happen here, I'm not going to handle every single exception because it could take quite a while, but when you're running your script, and if it blows up and throws an exception, figure out what the numerical code is, what that means, and then just put in another part of the if statement in here, like say else if error code equals 500 or 404, 400, or whatever it may be. Handle those, okay? But we're not going to get 400 errors because this is just permanent errors, which will all be 500s. But you might end up having like 4 or 5 different 500 error codes that you're handling. We're just going to handle the one where it doesn't exist, and I'll show you what that looks like when we run the program. All right, so that's good. And then let's see what else we can do here. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, so that's enough logic, hopefully, to try and change the directory and print the directory contents in the current directory. And if it fails for 550 error, it's going to tell the person, hey, you try to change a directory, but it doesn't exist. So try again. Okay, so that's good enough for that. So let's go on to the next one. elif commands, and this is going to get a little bit repetitive. You might be a better way to write this with some sort of function, but we're just going to kind of type it all out here. And let's do get. We'll do that one next. And that's to download file. And once again, do the same approach. We'll do a try and we'll do an accept. So it's going to be, what is that? Ftp Dot Retrieve Binary. And actually, probably steal this one from right here. That's what I'm going to do. No, I'm going to retype it because it's different. All right, so let's actually just get rid of all this. We have everything we need. So we'll just do fresh from here. So Ftp Dot Retrieve Binary. And again, remember, you got to put the retr space plus and then the file name. And in our case, it's going to be commands 1. So remember, we split these up. Okay, we split them up, and we split it here. And 0 is the command, and 1 is the file name. Okay, so we got that. That looks good. And just like before, open. And we want the destination name to be the same. So we'll do commands 1 and wb dot write. And we got to give it some, give them a notification, right? So you don't leave your user out in the dark. And we can do this because if this fails, it'll hit an exception and it'll break out of this loop. So the only way it's ever going to get to this print success is if it actually does successfully download it. So we're safe. So we'll do we have to do the exception next. So we'll do accept ftp lib dot error perm, just like above. So again, this is going to start looking familiar to you. And we're going to handle the same error because that's just as likely to happen. And let's see, I'm going to save myself the work and I'm going to copy this code here and move it down here because it's the same exact thing. That's what we're trying to do here. So we're just handling a 550 error, okay? Because there's except we'll say instead of directory we'll say file, because in this case they're trying to download a file and it's case sensitive and everything else, so they may very well type in the name wrong, okay? And we don't want that to happen. All right, so that looks pretty good, I guess. Yeah, that looks pretty good so far. So what can we do next? Well, let's not forget our colons there. That would have blown up. Okay. So now we are able to change directory, and we're also able to download a file. So that's pretty good. We're getting somewhere. What else might we want to do? Let's do another one. Let's do ls, okay, for directory listing. And this will, of course, print the directory listing. Let me bring that up a little bit. And this one's a little more straightforward. So we'll just do print directory of ftp.pwd and then just do ftp.dir. So just like we did up above, kind of the same thing. And let's do, last but not least, let's do commands 0 equals exit. Okay, so when they're done, they want to get out of that program. And do ftp.quit, which we did before. And we'll print like a nice goodbye message. And let's make it happy. And then, this is important, you break out of this loop. Okay? And then finally, if they put in something totally like out of control, like they do use a command that doesn't exist, This will be the last line of defense. We'll put in something like invalid command, try again, and let's refresh their memory with something like valid options, cd get, ls, and exit. So no squiggly red lines, no yellow lines. It looks like our program theoretically should work at this point. So all we have to do now is kind of initialize it. So let's do print welcome to Python FTP and Ftp Connect. So before we run this, it's going to welcome the user, and it's going to hit this function here, which is going to attempt to log in. If it fails, it'll let them know and it'll attempt again. Once it's successful, it'll run the Ftp Command function, which will ask them for a command, break that into two pieces, use the first piece to figure out what the actual command is, one of these, and use the second piece to execute the command. And we have change directory, download file, directory listing, and exit application. So let's run this, and hopefully it doesn't blow up. ftp.debian.org. Okay, so let's do cd debian. All right, great. So far, so good. Let's cd tools. That's working. Let's go back cd/debian. Okay, that's working. So we're able. We know that the directory navigation is working. Let's get readme. All right, so that was able to work. And let's type in something that's not real. Okay, so that's an invalid command. And last but not least, let's exit. And it says goodbye. So there you go. And actually, let me show you. We'll run it one more time and put an invalid FTP address. And it fails to connect, and it asks again. Okay. There you go. That's it. So you would probably want to add some sort of exception handling here in case they try to change to an invalid directory or list an invalid directory. No, actually you wouldn't, because they're going to be just doing a directory listing of the directory that they're already in. So there's no way for them to mess this one up. So that one's actually safe. So it looks like this is everything you need to know. So hopefully that wasn't too long and you learned something. And leave some comments, subscribe. Of course, if you have any questions or want to see anything else, just let me know. Thanks.